Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Thank you so much for joining me again today. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give us a ratings and review. If you'd like to see a video version of this podcast, please go to my YouTube page, Weitz Chiro. And if you go to my website, drweitz.com, you can find detailed show notes and a complete transcript. Today, we will be discussing the coronavirus pandemic with Dr. James Lyons-Weiler. COVID-19 is the disease caused by the infection with the coronavirus that has made its way from a bat to humans in China and now is spread around the globe, creating a global pandemic. Dr. James Lyons, is it Weiler or Wheeler? Weiler, thank you. Sorry about that. Is the founder and CEO of the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge, a not-for-profit research institute, also known as IPAC. He's the author of 3 books, one on Ebola, another on cures versus profits, and a third on the environmental and genetic causes of autism, which is based on over 2,000 peer-reviewed studies on autism. Thank you, Dr. Lyons-Weiler, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be part of your experience here on this planet.
Thank you. And that's definitely a good way to phrase it on a day like this when living in Los Angeles and trying to run a chiropractic practice and people are afraid to come out of their house and the level of fear, panic, and anxiety seems to be rising by the minute. So
you mean you guys haven't figured out all you have to do is put a shower curtain between you and your patient, you're fine, like in the movies?
So I thought we'd start with the most important question, and that is, what part does drinking Corona beers play in this coronavirus pandemic?
I think it's an essential part. You get the most clear-headed, rational thoughts that come to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be Corona either.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So can you explain how this coronavirus, because this is, we've had other coronaviruses before. We had SARS and we had MERS. Yeah. Can you explain how this coronavirus is different than the other coronaviruses?
Absolutely. So I'm going to be on that topic. I'll be talking about published research and not yet published research. So in the published research, we know that there are genomic differences at the genome level and important parts of important proteins. There are large differences. The spike protein seems to be quite distinct. The spike protein on the coronavirus is the protein that sits on the surface of the virus that allows entry. The virus uses it to enter into the host cell. And this
is that when we see those diagrams and those things sticking up?
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So those actually bind to a protein on the surface. It's called an ACE2 molecule in this virus, and it then fuses to the cellular membrane, and then the envelope opens up and becomes part of the cellular membrane, and then the contents of the virus, which is RNA, is spilled into the cell. The RNA that is seen by the cell as any other RNA, and then it starts creating viral proteins. So then you get a new virion, or a population of viruses in the cell, and then the cell bursts, and then the virus is spread from cell to cell. This particular virus has a spike protein that has a number of unique characteristics. There's a new Nature study that I just finished looking over this morning that shows that the spike protein has distinct, well, it's citing some previous literature. It has a furin cleavage site, which we've known about for about 2-3 weeks. But it has a number of distinct elements, including one that appears to potentially help the virus target immune cells. And that, my own research, and this is the unpublished part of it because it's still under peer review, my own research shows that there is a protein motif signature that is characteristic of this particular spike protein. There are 4 elements that we're paying attention to, and it seems to have, and I want scientists to understand this, it has a truncated N-terminal domain in the spike protein, in the first part of the protein. That's unusual compared to other SARS and other related beta coronaviruses. And then it's missing 2 other domains that appear to be present in all other coronaviruses that are related to this. And then it appears to have a GP40-like domain. I always say GP40-like domain because it is not a GP40 domain. So there are very specific molecular differences in the spike protein. It's going to have a different molecular function, therefore, because the sequence determines the structure, which determines the function. But that clinically, then, this is a very different virus because this virus has a 4 to 5 day asymptomatic period. So you can get infected, and then 4 or 5 days later, before you have your first symptoms. About 80% of people can be expected to have mild symptoms. But the people that do have serious symptoms, 14% need hospitalization and 66% need an ICU. So, we're at the onset of the outbreak here. We are at least 3 weeks behind where we could have been with accurate testing. Initially, we really missed the ball in accurate testing. But nevertheless, we're in the exponential part of the curve. And during that exponential part of the curve, it's a race between the ability to produce enough tests and the virus to spread. And so now we've enacted some pretty serious social distancing. If you've noticed, it's impacting everyone's lives now.
Yes.
2 months ago, I was saying that we should stop shaking hands. We should start using the Ebola fist bump and so on. We need to sanitize public places. We need to tell people that are not essential to work from home if they can. And had those policies been implemented then in a gentle way, we would have bought more time. But now we've already reached the exponential curve. And in the exponential curve, then, social is even 60% complete quarantine with this virus will not lead to a shutdown. You can force quarantine 60% of the 60% of the American population, and it'll still spread.
So I got a bunch of questions, but one question I wanted to ask to follow up on the fact that you said there's this incubation period. During that incubation period, if you get tested, would you potentially test positive or not until you become symptomatic?
There's high levels of viruses in the pre-symptomatic period or the asymptomatic period. Unfortunately, the test that the CDC put out is maybe 60% sensitive, which means that there's a lot of people that are going to be given false. Yeah, that a lot of people that are going to be given false confidence that they don't have the virus, and that's why we're at where we are. I analyzed the CDC's primer probe sets, and I found that a quarter of them actually amplify human proteins, or likely to amplify human proteins, as well as a viral protein, which could, unfortunately, the way they set up the test, it was best 3 out of 4 amplification reactions as a diagnostic. So if a person didn't have, they basically needed 3 out of 3, because one of the primer probe sets was probably, that reaction was probably not going to lead to a true positive ever. And so they said that there was some contamination or something like that, but I sent this information to CDC, and then I sent it to the FDA, and they showed great interest. The FDA showed great interest in what potentially could be wrong with this kit. Now, because we're already in the exponential part of the curve, places like the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center have announced that they're making their own test. People are not waiting. We cannot wait for the CDC to distribute accurate testing. That's what people have decided. I think it's a clinically ethical thing to do, to want to know. The value of testing at this point is not to shut it down. Don't make no uncertain terms. Don't be confused by this. If we have 100 or 200 cases or 1,000 cases, for every one of those, there might be 80. For every one case, there might be 80 to 100 more cases that are out there that we don't know about. And so there's no way that the medical community is going to find all those people at this point. We've lost contact tracing. It's the asymptomatic period. Contact tracing is not going to be useful. The only utility of testing this point forward that I see would be expeditious use of resources like ICUs. And so we need really accurate testing. We need ventilators. There's
well, I mean, how can we know where the curve is to decide upon strategies like how long are we going to do social distancing and quarantining or whatever you want to call it, unless we really know, what the numbers are, and do we even know to what extent the numbers are going up, or just the fact that we're testing all these people who maybe were already positive and
I'll take that question as a serious one. There are two countries that we could have followed the model of. One is South Korea. We cannot follow the South Korea model. It's too late. We already reached the exponential point. They did expert contact tracing with online information systems that were really exquisite. They did testing. They had it in place in time. It's too late for us to have a serious impact in terms of slowing down the spread of this, because we have, for every case that you see right now, that person was also 4 to 5 people 5 days ago were also infected along with that one person. So we're looking at maybe of the number of cases that we have, we know 20% of what we have.
Wow.
So because we don't have the contact tracing combined in parity with the clinical testing, and the tests that people are being shipped is not accurate.
How did that happen? Why is there such this massive screw up on the testing? Why were we so late with the testing? Why didn't we take the World Health Organization test? And what's the screw up at the CDC?
So unfortunately, CDC is more like a business corporation than it is a regulatory agency. It's not. They have a not-for-profit that pharmaceutical companies donate over $27 million to every year in the name of doing good for humanity. However, the World Health Organization offered the CDC the Germans test, the test from Germany. And they declined, and that cost us incredibly valuable 2 weeks. And I was hammering on, no, we need to get the testing now. We need to get the testing now. The other country whose model where do we know where we are in the curve? Well, we know we're exponential. We know we're only seeing, maybe 20% of the cases that are actually resident in the country. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. They include medical staff right now. They include nurses. They include the doctors and so on. They include taxi cab drivers, they could be anyone. And the point is not to scare people, but China did not wait for a vaccine. China used social distancing, they put the people in home, and if you broke quarantine, you were arrested. That's why you saw people arrested. People say, oh my God, that can't ever happen here. Believe me, every governor in every state will prosecute you if you're under mandatory quarantine and you found to violate that quarantine. You will be arrested. You will be tried. You could be fined or imprisoned. Absolutely. Okay.
But to this point, we've never had mandatory quarantine, right?
I think San Francisco is now, pretty close to that. Pretty close to where everybody's supposed to stay.
Well,
right?
They're told, my son's in San Francisco right now going to college. And so they're basically told they're supposed to stay at home except for important things like going to the grocery store.
Okay, right. So we'll get to that. Right. So quarantine doesn't mean that you have to have 3 months of food in your house, right? So it means it's a good idea to have a week or two, right? But here's the deal. China shut this down.
And we're not going to, the water supply is not going to be jeopardized.
The roof of your house is not going to blow off. It's not a hurricane. You're going to have electricity. Okay. The wastewater treatments are still going to work. Okay. So the utilities will all be there. But in China,
so stop stocking up on water bottles.
Well, I mean, if it makes you feel better, right? There's that aspect of it. If you like to see 20 cans of sardines in your pantry, go for it. That, if it makes you feel better, you're not hurting anybody by doing that. So you're actually driving the economy a little bit, right? So, and that's actually a very serious point.
I know the supermarkets are booming right now.
So in China, they shut this down through a combination of therapeutics and social distancing. They didn't just use social distancing, and there's no vaccine in China. They shut it down. And let me show you a curve, okay? China was doing this, and we're now talking about extending the curve out, flattening the curve out so that the medical community has time to be able to prepare to handle it. China's curve went just like this.
I just looked at it on a map, and can we trust that? Those statistics?
Yes, we can. The doctors are taking their, yes, we can. The doctors are taking, the nurses are taking their masks off. People are showing up in the streets. You're going to see video over the next few days or next week of Wuhan itself returning to normalcy. And that's what we want, because we cannot afford an extended social distancing. It will destroy our economy to maintain social distancing. And there's no promise that the vaccine that's being tried right now in Seattle is going to show the safety profile that it needs to. I'm very, very skeptical that the animal studies, well, they skipped the animal studies and they went right to human trials. The problem with that is that the animal studies in every other SARS-like, MERS-like vaccine that used the spike protein,
right?
The animals getting the vaccine when they were challenged with the virus after the vaccine had worse clinical outcomes, higher morbidity, higher mortality. They had immunopathology in the lungs. They had hepatitis. They had serious issues. And I think it's an autoimmune reaction that you get sensitized to it by the vaccine, and then you get challenged by the virus. So I did a deep dive into the epitopes that are in the virus in SARS-CoV-2. And the deep dive that I did showed that there were, out of the 37 proteins that I studied, like all of them except for 6 had immunogenic peptides. So there's 6 of them that won't be useful in a vaccine. Out of all of those that had immunogenic peptides, all of them except for 1 had a match to a human protein. And a third of those matches were to immune system proteins. So that's probably why these animals had a worse outcome, because their own immune system was being attacked by their own immune system after they were challenged by the second virus. It's a 2-hit hypothesis. People are calling it immune enhancement, which is it's a misnomer. It's a gross misnomer. We're changing the terminology to pathologic priming, where the first exposure to the virus sets you up for a worse outcomes, whether it's through clinical exposure, you get a double infection. You get the SARS virus this year, you get another SARS coronavirus next year, whatever the second exposure is. And I think that it probably explains why the mortality was so high initially in the Hubei province and in Wuhan, because the people there have been exposed to coronaviruses for years. And yet the national vaccine program that was mandatory and a widespread vaccine program only got started on December 1st. So, we've got people that are exposed to this virus while their bodies still has adjuvants from the vaccines in them. In many cases, multiple adjuvants. And so
wait a minute. So starting in December, they were vaccinated with which vaccine?
They just started a national mandatory vaccine program. There was a new law that
for this novel coronavirus.
No, just for vaccination programs for other pathogens.
So did they get immunized against SARS?
No, I don't think they have. No, they don't have a SARS. Okay, not to my knowledge. That was my initial concern. So that China, a company called Sinovac, actually in the 2000s did a vaccine safety phase 1 trial on humans. They did a vaccine trial on humans. I think they had 45 participants. I've never seen a phase 2 or a phase 3, but my initial suspicion, because the mortality was so high, I couldn't believe that a simple coronavirus could possibly lead to such high mortality and morbidity. And people are saying we can't trust from China what's going on. No, it was real. And if it was that high, what possibly could have caused it? And I suspected that perhaps the Chinese had on December 1st started a secret phase 2 or 3 clinical trial in Hubei province with a SARS coronavirus, setting people up, unbeknownst to them, for this pathogenic priming, aka immune enhancement. I'm not sure if that's real or not, but I know they didn't do that in Italy. So Italy has high morbidity. So we want to talk about the risk factors about who's most likely to get truly sick and die here. there's a linear relationship between your age and your risk of serious illness, critical illness, and death. If you're above the age,
is that mainly because older people, are more likely to have cardiovascular or respiratory problems, and because they're more likely to have immune issues?
I think that's probably, a big part of it, because if you have a cardiovascular issue, you have like a 10% chance of mortality. If you have diabetes, you have a 6% chance of mortality. What are we doing here in the United States with such a high rate of what we call metabolic syndrome?
Right.
We're sitting ducks for this virus. So we absolutely have to shut it down. We're going to see like 6% of people.
Well, if you don't believe in exercise and you're just going to sit around and eat Big Macs and tweet all day, then there you are.
Absolutely. So think of all the people that with diabetes, and imagine 6% of them getting this virus and dying. So that's a serious amount of morbidity and mortality. There are other underlying conditions. People that get the virus one time can get infected again, and it appears that they can suffer from myocarditis and die, some of them. And we don't know if that's due to, direct.
So you're saying you can get it again a second time?
Unfortunately, some people appear to. Yeah, there's multiple reports from multiple countries.
Because theoretically, once you get a virus, then your body builds antibodies to it, right?
Correct. And remember, I just talked about how there's this pathogenic
cross-reactivity to your own immune cells.
Right. So the patient in the ward next to you, actually, if you inject me with this SARS coronavirus 2, and then I'm sick for a live one, and then I'm sick for a week or so, and then you isolate the virus after I've been sick for a week or so, you're going to see a different virus. There's a huge amount of selection to adapt to my immune system. Plus, this coronavirus is always recombined. If there's more than 2 types of coronavirus in the same animal or the same body of a human, the very nature of their transcriptional process means if you have one cell infected with 2 types, they recombine. You get a new virus. So we don't really know what's going on, but we know that there's probably a huge autoimmune component. So if you have cellular myocarditis, because you've got cellular infiltrates like eosinophils and other aspects of the immune system, you could end up with a very serious death rate of people who get a secondary infection, right? And that's why I am proposing very, very strongly, and we're about to go huge with this, that everyone should contact their congressional representatives, I'm talking federal, not state, and everyone should contact their senators and say that we need the CDC, the NIH, and the FDA to get behind convalescent plasma therapy. Now, there's going to be so many people that survive from this. They're walking around with antibodies.
Okay, can you explain what convalescent plasma therapy is?
Absolutely. So let's say that I had the sickness and I get well again. I have the antibodies, right? So I donate a liter of my blood, and then you isolate the antibodies, and then those antibodies become a biological product. That biological product is screened for other viruses to make sure that I'm not carrying HIV or something. And then if you're a frontliner, or if you're in the military, or if you're an EMT or a medical staff, you're given a dose of those antibodies. It gives you a form of passive resistance, and it works. There's great 10 out of 10 patients in a recent study on this came out great. Ian Lipkin, who's a world-renowned virologist, has announced that Johns Hopkins University is entering into a clinical trial. I think we need everybody to ask for 50 clinical trials now in all 50 states. Most of the money that's afforded to the CDC, the $8 billion, is allegedly, I guess, going to go towards distribution of tests and vaccines. And the problem is, if we wait for 2 months, look at people are losing their houses, people are losing their jobs, we've only been under partial kind of like a hint of social distancing for 2 days. And the world's falling apart. How are we supposed to do this for 2 months, or let alone 18 months? We cannot. It will destroy our economy to wait for a vaccine. Absolutely.
And by the way, I believe that phase 1 trial that's going on is going to continue for like a year or something, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely ludicrous. And it's unbelievable I'm not going to, be too critical, but it's unbelievable that knowing that plasma convalescent therapy is an option, that the bulk of the money is going towards things like testing when we need to shut down. So let me make the following prediction: the way that this epidemic, this outbreak in the United States, this pandemic will end, it will not involve a vaccine. It will end through a combination of social distancing and therapeutics. There are antivirals that pharma will be asked to start mass producing, like remdesivir and chloroquine phosphate, which is an antimalarial drug, and others. There are supplements that are very important that people have, like selenium. If you're selenium deficient, the virus can enter your cells more easily. High-dose vitamin C, the Chinese use that as well. They use vitamin C, and it appears to have a protective effect by reducing viremia, the number of viruses in your body, so you can't transmit it. It's very, very important that we understand that this epidemic, this outbreak, will end through a combination of social distancing and therapeutics. Social distancing alone will just destroy our economy. And we're not going to let 20% of our elderly people die. We're not going to let 6% to 45% of Americans with diabetes die, and we're not going to let 10% of people on ACE2 inhibitors with cardiovascular disease die. So the way that this is going to end, I'm predicting right here and now, is that people are going to say, no, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to lose everything that I've built. I'm going to lose everything I've saved up 20 years of my effort for. Please give us therapeutics. And we don't have time for a vaccine. We don't have time to wait for it.
Right. It's interesting, the big variance in fatality rates. I looked at the Worldometer info website, and the fatality rate in Italy is 7.7%, whereas the fatality rate in Germany is 0.23%. That's freaking amazing contrast.
It is. So look at factors like smoking in Germany compared to smoking in Italy. Look at the age distributions. There's a lot of older Italians because of their Mediterranean lifestyle, the diet, that mysterious thing that keeps Italians alive older, right? And there's these factors that play into it. Also, look at the nutrients in the soil. So how much selenium is in Italian soil and how much selenium is in the vegetables that they eat compared to that in Germany? I don't know. I know Germany was glaciated and then deglaciated during the last, 16 or 18 times through the Pleistocene. I don't think they made it past the Alps. I think Italy was always, what you have in Italy was there throughout. It might have been flooded and reflooded. So we might have a very different soil in Italy. They might benefit from selenium. There might be a genetic component too. So there's a genetic component in the virus. We think that there's two types of the virus. There's the slow and the fast, and there's S and the L. The one that's more deadly apparently was the one that was clustered in Hubei, and once in the Hubei province in China. The story goes from the Chinese that once it got out into the rest of China, there was another virus that came about. It's with a mutation. And that it's less lethal. That's exactly what we expect to happen. Okay, so they should type the virus in Italy and see if it's the more dangerous type. If that's true, then we know, okay, we're dealing with a more dangerous type. So you need to type the virus. And then there's also genetics in people. So the human genetics plays a role here too in terms of susceptibility to these factors. And smoking. I mentioned smoking. Right now, all Americans everywhere quit smoking everything. Don't let your smoking habits or your pleasure that you get from smoking outweigh the fact that this virus is more likely to enter your cells if you smoke, because smoking causes increased production of availability of ACE2. And if you're on ACE2, if you're on ACE2 inhibitors, ACE receptors, I should say. So there's receptors on the cell, and if you're on an ACE inhibitor for blood pressure, then you're inhibiting the ACE2 molecules that usually go into the receptor, and by doing that, then you're freeing up all the receptors to be available for the virus to enter cells. So you're going to get more rapid viral growth and more viremia more.
So ACE inhibitors increase your risk. I also just read that one of the officials in France today came out and said that taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatories also increases the ACE receptors.
Right. And the fact that steroidal treatments seem to help really points to an autoimmune component to this, the root cause of this disease. We see a cytokine storm. That to me is an outcome of an autoimmune. It's in a vicious cycle, cytokine storm. But to me, if you start to see cytokines released, that's a signal that you have an autoimmune attack going on for the most part, or a really extensive rapid viral attack. But the autoimmune component, because if you use steroids, that tends to actually modulate the immune system. So you might be seeing the fact that the steroidal anti-inflammatories are safer. But the other thing, unfortunately, the French also recommended paracetamol. They recommended what we call Tylenol.
Yes,
and I think that's a big problem because you need your glutathione. To be able to fight off infections, you need your glutathione to talk, because when you get an infection, your body starts producing cellular toxins. Those cellular toxins are strange misfolded proteins that your body they see as foreign, and so your body doesn't know to attack with the immune system or what. So if you have glutathione, it gets tagged, goes to the liver, and it gets removed. That's a much better route. And if you have a very serious fever of 104.5 or so, you've got to get that fever under control, because the fever itself can start denaturing critical proteins. But the medical community in France did a service by saying, watch out for ibuprofen, go for steroidal if you can. I think they don't know what they're looking at as autoimmune.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons why we've been recommending a nutrient known as N-acetylcysteine, because it's a precursor for glutathione, and it's been shown to have some activity against viruses.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm taking NAC. I'll tell people what I'm taking. I'm taking N-acetylcysteine. I'm taking selenium.
How much NAC are you taking?
I don't talk doses because I'm not a medical doctor. Right. Then it becomes like, okay, wait a minute. But people can look at the package and they can figure out. Well, you don't have
to recommend it. You can just tell us what you're taking. I can tell you that I take 900 milligrams of NAC twice a day.
That's fantastic. So how's your selenium?
Yeah, I also take 200 to 300 micrograms of selenium, and I take 45 to 60 milligrams of zinc, partially because I have a gene that makes it more difficult to absorb zinc. And so I also take glycyrrhizin, which is a licorice extract.
Yep. Right. And these are supposed to be helpful in some way. Although, by the way, licorice is also really good for adrenal support. And in these times of stress and anxiety, that's not a bad idea either. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're talking about is licorice root extract. Don't go out and buy, Twizzlers and think you're going to save the world. It's not going to do it for you. And also don't get DGL, which is deglycerinized licorice. The one thing you have to look out for it with glyceric acid is it can raise your blood pressure. So monitor your blood pressure. Well, there you go. Yeah. So when we're looking at the epidemiology of this thing, this is a fascinating moment in the history of epidemiology in the United States as well, because I'm seeing kind of an inversion. I'm seeing the people who are skeptical of allopathy, right, kind of looking at it more like, okay, this is a pattern at the population level. And I'm seeing now epidemiologists really, really super focused on the molecular level. It's a really strange kind of inversion, whereas in other aspects of medicine, I see the people that are concerned about toxins and vaccines or that kind of thing really more focused on the molecular end, and doctors saying, no, the epidemiology shows there's nothing there at the population level. What about the individual, right? So we don't have to rehash that whole thing, but it's really interesting because I think there's a teachable moment here, a really big learning opportunity here where, we argue a lot about causality when it comes to like vaccine adverse events. We argue about, well, it's just a correlation. Here, we really don't have the luxury of a randomized prospective clinical trial of infecting, people with a virus and then saying, okay, so therefore we know because it was a saline-controlled, placebo-controlled, double-blinded, randomized placebo clinical trial of virus infection. And yet we know so much about how this virus is affecting people by observational data, right? So it's kind of a fascinating moment in time where we can see people struggling to understand mechanisms of disease, the mechanisms of pathophysiology from a virus using the tools that we're restricted to use in terms of like vaccine injury. And yet they're somehow able to sort it out and come out with pretty strong statements like you probably shouldn't use ibuprofen, this kind of thing, right?
Right. Are any of the antiviral medications like the one from Gilead liable to play a role in this?
Absolutely. So in addition to the plasma therapy, we absolutely have to, if I was, you said earlier, you know, if you were this omniscient, all-powerful, mighty person, if I was president of the United States right now, I would do a press conference, sit in the Oval Office, and I would ask on television for pharmaceutical companies to ramp up productions of antivirals for the U.S. military, for frontline defenders, right, the first responders, and for families and coworkers that have it. Right, so we're talking about remdesivir, we're talking about chloroquine phosphate. There's actually an expert opinion piece, a consensus panel out of China that said these are the treatments that we use that worked. So we know what works. And so if we don't do antivirals and if we don't do the plasma therapy, we're going to see the curve extend out for months and months and months, and it'll destroy our economy.
Yeah, there's no way we can survive months and months and months. So what's your prediction how long we're going to be involved in this social isolation thing we're doing?
Great question. So if after you watch this podcast, you find your senator's email and you find your congressional representative's email and you find their phone number, both the Washington office and the local office, and you email both of them, both types of people. You got 2 senators and a certain number of congressional reps. Email all of them, I should say, and call both offices and say that you want therapeutics added to the agenda. Tell them you want plasma, convalescent therapy, and antivirals added to the agenda as the first step of defense to shutting down social distancing. That's what we need. We need to promote that this is it's readily available. We can do this now. All right. And like I said, China took their curve, which was going up like this. It did social distancing, added antivirals and convalescent, and it dropped to 0. The number of new cases remarkably just went from like thousands to 46. Right.
Because it sounds like probably adding some IV vitamin C and maybe some IV glutathione wouldn't be a bad idea as part of the mix as well.
So for treatment, IV therapy would be great. If you have access to an IV system and you could do IV vitamin C, that probably would have the same kind of antiviral effect, right? The glutathione, absolutely. Look up on the internet how to enhance your glutathione. In America, we are so proud of our independent. We don't want to turn to the government to do the right thing, but take care of yourself, increase your glutathione intake, take everything out of your lifestyle that's depleting your glutathione, and be as healthy as you can. Get sunshine when you can. Get out in the sunshine every day if you can. Get the exercise you were talking about. But we're not turning to the government for support. We're turning to the government to tell them, don't make a mistake. Don't do the wrong thing. Right. And this is why I think we need to bring civics back into the classroom, because the one thing that I hope that my sons learned from me, other than the science that they know and the lifelong love of science, they're both on route to be scientists. The one thing that I hope that they understood that they got from me, and I know that they did because I can see what they're doing, is that you don't just have the right to participate in your own governance in the United States. You have a moral obligation and responsibility to be part of your own governance. You can't just sit back on your couch and wait for somebody else to make good decisions, right? So even if you know nothing about coronavirus, the more you learn this week, read everything that you can. Watch all my blogs. Read all my blog articles at jameslyons-weiler.com and watch all of the videos at WWDNYK Studios on YouTube about coronavirus. And there's another guy I would say you guys need to watch is John Campbell out of the UK. This man is doing a saint's job since the beginning. He's been tracking the numbers. and he's calm, and he's not excitable like me. I'm excitable and agitatable, but he's calm, grandfatherly. He will make you feel like the world is not ending, right? But he also, from time to time, when he gets emotional, he's such a gentleman, he turns the camera off. That's all he does. When he starts getting upset and angry at the World Health Organization for not declaring a pandemic, he stops talking and turns off the camera. And I have no idea what he does once the camera's off. But John Campbell, this guy is great. And I believe he should be nominated for some serious Nobel Peace Prize or something like that, because he's a PhD nurse that's been teaching the public what coronavirus is from as well as he can. There's sometimes when he speaks and I'm like, that's not exactly right, but he's excellent. John Campbell, he's a hero of mine for sure.
So we're going to have to continue with the social isolation until we see that curve start to go down, or are we just going to say, we're getting tired of this? And
there's no way that they're going to let, like I said, 20% of everybody over the age of 60 get this virus. It's not going to happen. They're not going to let 6% of diabetics die. They're not going to let 10% of people with cardiovascular disease die. So the only option that we have, one way or the other, whether it's because I say it or you say it, or because the rest of society wakes up that we need therapies, we need therapeutics. And until we clamor and really, if you want to go back to work, you want to go make some money, call your congressman and your senator and tell them that you think therapeutics are 100% necessary to shutting this down now.
I personally think that there's a huge number of small businesses there's no way they can hold out more than 4 weeks.
Yeah, well, there's some they're folding right now.
No, I know that.
So be a decent citizen. The people that are stockpiling food, that's fine. But I hope that you bought non-perishables, because if you got 3 months worth of food and we were successful in shutting this down next month, right, you're good for the rest of the year. But be a good citizen, and the restaurants that you used to frequent, they still will deliver. They still will allow carryout, right? So use the restaurants and keep the money flowing, right? And by the way, if you're in quarantine, there's some psychological advice too. Do things that, look at it as a staycation. Don't look at it as the end of the world, right? We're such type A Americans. We don't know how to relax. Oh my God, I got to be home with my wife and kids for so long. Or if you're a wife, I got to be home with my husband and kids for so long. Or if you're a kid, oh my God, I got to be with my parents for so long. Take a moment and reconnect as a family. Get out the board games that you always wish that you taught your kids how to play. Monopoly. It's fun. The game of life. It's fun. Okay, have the fun. If you're kind of isolated and alone, take that moment. Take the next 8 weeks or whatever it's going to be to learn a new language. I use Duolingo, and I've learned German using Duolingo, okay? I have no financial relationships or financials to disclose, but you can learn a new language, learn a new musical instrument. Learn some new life skill. If you always wanted to master that one recipe that your grandmother used, well, it doesn't matter. Take up gardening. Do something that's healthy and productive. How about those projects around the house that you've been delaying and you don't want to get to, right? So there's a lot that you can do and take advantage of this time and still feel like, okay,
read a book. Read one of Dr. Lyons-Weiler's books.
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I appreciate that.
You can always gang watch the Rational Wellness podcast.
That's right. Here's the environmental and genetic causes of autism, which I hear is a sleeper. There's 1,000 studies on autism.
Okay, and
cures versus profits for you want to learn some things about.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 16 or 18 different topics, I think, in here on biomedical research and what makes legitimate biomedical objective research and what makes it not legitimate. It's got things like why do we know that the hormone receptors on breast cancers will help us determine which chemotherapy is likely to be effective? How did that come about? It tells the history of the things that we take for granted. But it goes also into some controversial areas, which I'm proud to say I didn't shy away from. ADHD, for instance, while the pharmaceutical companies were saying it's genetic, there's nothing you can do, I was writing a chapter, it's their brain, not yours, okay? And I go right deep into the science about what's right and wrong with the studies, about the things that we think that we know from biomedical research. And the podcast, What We Do Not Yet Know Studios, it's called Unbreaking Science. And we get into a lot of topics that I think people find really interesting. So, and also, if you've always wanted to create your own kind of outlet, people need outlets. They want to be heard, right? Do what Ben here is doing. Dr. Weitz is doing this. Get out there and do your own podcast if you always wanted to do it, right? We need to hear from people that have, creative and good ideas.
Awesome. I think that's a good way to wrap this podcast interview.
Right on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lyons-Weiler. Excellent information. I think this is super timely. I'm going to definitely get this up tonight.
All right. Thank you. Also, please stop by ipa-knowledge.org if you could and check out what IPAC is doing. That's the Institute for Pure and Applied Knowledge. We've been up and running since 2015, doing research in the public interest without profit motive, no connection to the government except for regulatory, and no connection to any corporate, finances. So take it easy.
Are you guys looking for donations?
Oh, absolutely. We're 100%. We're 100% funded by the public, and we're almost done with our 501c3 application. So we're not yet a charity, but we're not for profit in Pennsylvania.
Cool. And your book's available through?
I would recommend people go to independent booksellers near you, and if they don't have it on the shelf, ask for it, because look up my name, James Lyons-Weiler, because when they order one, then they tend to order multiple ones. But also, we want to keep local businesses in business. Amazon's got enough money.
I'm with you on that.
Right on. All right.
Excellent.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you, James.